Welcome to another episode of the Multipliers podcast. I will be your host for today. My name is Mahdi, and it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest, Eric Wilson, the managing partner of MENA Growth Partners. Eric, thank you for being on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
I'm very happy to do this, particularly for you, Mehdi, personally, but also for the Multiply Group.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's start from the beginning. Can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, it just makes me sound like a really old guy, but believe it or not, I first came to the region in 1984. I was lucky to grow up overseas a lot of my life, and coming out of college, I think J.P. Morgan was looking for the only American with a passport, which I had at that time, and they took me on to work for one of their joint ventures with the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. And so in 1984, I went to Riyadh the first time, and also Dubai and Muscat and the region, and really enjoyed it. Obviously, in your early 20s, everything's exciting, but Saudi Arabia in the 80s was pretty interesting. So I was there for most of the 80s, and then after that stint. Went back to the U.S. and worked at a firm called Piper Jaffray, now called Piper Sandler. Was there 14 years. It's one of their premier healthcare firms on Wall Street, and had a wonderful tenure there, and which actually brought a lot of the work that I've been doing here as well as a result of that healthcare background, but also with Piper. In 2001, some partners, Michael Moe and Deborah Quazzo, and I and a few others started a firm called Think Equity Partners. Ultimately sold it in '07 to a bank in England that was owned by the Qataris. And so in '09, I moved to Doha. And worked there for 3 years, and have been here, physically ever since. We have a firm licensed in the ADGM. Very happy to be in Abu Dhabi. Our youngest grew up here, and felt it so much at home that when he graduated from college in the U.S., had asked to come back here and move as well. So it's a special place for us. Obviously, I've been here for almost 40 years on and off, and really feel blessed to have had so much time here, and the friends and the clients that we built.
It's a wonderful story, and especially when you came in 1984. My dad came a few years before you to the region. What did it look like in '84?
Well, I think we'd be swimming right now, or in the sand. It was a bit of the Wild West. At the time when we came through Dubai, there was nothing past the creek. So, in fact, I think if I remember right, there was only one hotel, maybe two. And yet, like I said, as a 20-year-old and having lived in unique places like Iran and India and Sri Lanka and some others, I loved it. Interestingly, with Saudi, it was they were just really starting to kind of wake up from the oil money. J.P. Morgan does a lot of things really well, and one that it does is it creates these joint ventures with some of the sovereign pools of capital, and as well as train a lot of the families, which I was very lucky to have gotten to know many of the young Saudis. We were all the same age. We're now in our 60s. They're running their firms. I'm running mine, and we still, alhamdulillah, have been great friends ever since. What's interesting back then is that, everything was pretty binary. It was oil driven. I mean, everything was. I was not a specific, banker at the time. And so ultimately from Sama, I was sent over to Aramco, and basically we were doing cash flow for them. It was back during the netback days. And we were taking the money from primarily the U.S. companies at that time, and then we were doing things with it. So we would actually send it to outside money managers. But then one of the fun things that I was able to do was work on the joint venture projects that were in the north in Jubail and Yambu. And then I could have stories like this I can tell my kids and grandkids. I slept in a car overnight because in Yambu there was no hotel or airport at the time when I was there. Jubail is the same thing. We got all excited when the Holiday Inn opened later, and yet that was an amazing time and helped create SABIC and a lot of the joint venture partners. But really more than that, I got the first real taste of, what the relationships and the culture is like here, which is really remarkable. I mean, I'm still, alhamdulillah, great friends with some of those people, from the 80s and all along, because, the one amazing thing with the Arab culture is that while it might take a little long to become brothers when you are, your family. And I feel that now in almost everything that I do. And as far as bankers go, and those that might be listening here, at that time, nobody, I think, ever appreciated the transformation that was going to happen. I certainly, had no idea. For me, it was a fun job at the time. Little did I know that here, we are now, 2024, and, we're really on top of the world here.
So you've seen the whole transformation of the region. If you want to have like certain reflections of, for example, as you said, there were no Holiday Inns in Jubail, and now you look at Saudi and how much it's growing, and you've seen the whole growth in Qatar and in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. So I'm kind of surprised that JP Morgan had a presence in the region back in '84, because now we're seeing more and more companies trying to move to the region. So JP Morgan had the foresight back in those days to actually set up an office here. So when do you think that started and you started seeing more and more American firms coming here to the region?
Yeah, sadly, I think most people realized where the Middle East was on a map really kind of in the last, few years. I say that from a business perspective. We having been here, for decades, a lot of what I had to do during the summers, one, to get away from the heat here, but also, we'd go around and be meeting with companies to try to bring them here. Sadly, we had to do a lot of selling back then, because, whether the press was right or wrong, there was the impression this was an unsafe, part of the world, one that Americans weren't, welcome or whatever. Obviously, it's completely not the case. In fact, I'm happy over all the years. Many of my clients ultimately come here and actually buy properties here. They just fall in love with it. And so there was a definite, real misconception. I didn't feel that in the 80s, and maybe just the naivety of being in my 20s. And Morgan does so many things well. They were doing these joint ventures all over the world. The fact that I was picked to go to the one in Saudi, either luck or whatever the right word might be. And it was really just the oil and the other related companies. I think when capital ended up being, so obvious, then that's when, more of the companies ended up starting to come. But honestly, I really haven't, it's really been the last few years that we've seen this wholesale, thing. I think we joked, Mehdi, that I had to stop looking at my LinkedIn, these last couple of years, because if I had a cup of coffee or lunch with somebody 20 years ago, they were LinkedIn me going, Eric, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm in the lobby of the Four Seasons. Will you help me, get to know the people here? And so obviously now, people have realized it, which was, I think, now it's being forced. But the greatest thing about the last few years with the region, and the UAE in particular, though, is that, we'd been trying to say this was the bridge between the East and West, where Singapore arguably probably was, or maybe even Hong Kong. there's no question, and I think it was partly driven by COVID, but this is now permanently, I believe, the bridge between the East and the West. People came here, during COVID, and they never left because they loved it. And when I, have to, be talking to our U.S. clients, and if they're coming here for the first time, they always ask the question, "Am I going to be safe?" And I relish the opportunity to bring out, the reports that say Abu Dhabi is the safest country in the world. U.S. is 68th. I don't worry about, my wallet, my phone until I go home, until I go to the U.S. It's an amazing place, and I'm just so proud to be, an Arab American, basically now, being able to, say, "Hey, I told you so." And people really, really love it here.
You are truly half Arab.
Well, that's an incredible compliment. There's so many examples where I feel that. And what I would tell also the people that are listening, the amazing thing about here, if you're just looking for money, it's incredibly sticky. It takes a long time to get it, but when you get it, again, your family, and they'll be with you time and time, round and round and round again. With the friendships, it's even more deep than that, and I really relish that. And again, I think the best example is my youngest that they grew up here, voted with his feet, and actually left a U.S. university to come back, to live and work here.
Yeah, absolutely. And what advice would you have for all the new companies that are coming here, not just from America, but from all over the world, in terms of the business culture? Because you've seen it all. So what advice would you have to them if they want to succeed in our part of the world?
Well, the first thing, and just to prove that I'm not a commercial for the GCC and the UAE, people have got to have a lot of patience. The old adage is that there's no such thing as a bad meeting in the Middle East, and that's because the culture here is never to say no. They just don't want to offend. They don't want to disappoint. And so I would say over half of the calls that I get are people going, "Gosh, I've been here and I've been here now a couple of years. The meetings are all great, but nothing ever happens." And what I would say in that regard, there's two things. One is, you have to think about meeting other people than just the couple. You also have to be very cognizant about what the region is actually looking for as well. Again, back to your question about the differences between 84 and now, is that, for a very, very long time, the capital was one way. It basically left here. And the managers would come here, reluctantly. They'd come to, try to get money from one of the sovereign funds, and then, try not, only come back once a year. That's really changed. And I'm very, very happy to see that. Because as an investment banker, our firm, what we're looking to do is again, definitely get capital for our clients, but also show them why this is a great market and a great place to be. And so, there's now a real two-way street. They have the capital. They know they have the capital. I believe they're going to have the capital for the next several decades, relative to the rest of the world. And so it's really a necessity and a reality, that now it's okay. They know you're coming, for investment, but at the same time, in our case, we do a lot in healthcare. Sadly, it's a sick population, and they realize that they want to make their population much healthier. So if they're going to invest in healthcare companies, they also want to see some of that, those products and companies, come to the region, which I completely agree with.
Let's talk a bit about the areas of focus that you have now, healthcare, wellness being one of them. So where do you see the trends moving in the future?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And healthcare is one of those asset classes that, everybody always is interested in because everybody cares about, their health, ultimately. What the region's, I think, doing so well now, and it's a challenge. They want to create these biohub or healthcare ecosystems. And, it took Boston, a really long time, years, or Silicon Valley. They're using capital, which is great. And then also, looking to create these ecosystems. The good news is that, it's an incredibly willing, not only government, but population and healthcare system that facilitates the ease of that versus the rest of the world where healthcare can be very dragged down by a lot of the regulatory bodies. It's good now to see, research institutes. In Qatar, you've got Sidra, which is an amazing pediatric hospital, looking to do a lot of things. You've got obviously Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi here. You've got all of Mubadala healthcare assets. Saudi's trying to do the same thing. So, from that perspective, it's two things. One is, right now there's a lot of diabetes and obesity issues, but also sadly other lifestyle diseases like cancer and some of the others. So we're seeing a lot of interest in some of the more innovative technologies now. Some of the gene sequencing and CRISPR, companies that would historically been very early stage for here. But now the government is supporting and wanting to create that ecosystem, as well as the manufacturer of vaccines and drugs here. Again, one of the things that's tough about the geography here is that they still import the majority of everything. And I think COVID pointed out the fact that, listen, if all of a sudden, there are going to be issues, global transportation, logistics, whatever, they could be in a tough spot. So they're very keen to create their own industries here. And they realize that they need the help and the help primarily of the West. And for that, they're very keen to joint venture, to invest. I can also tell you, they're some of the best partners anybody can ever have, and our clients always, time and time again, say, "My gosh, the partners that you helped us with, they're really our favorites." So again, great ecosystem, incredible government support.
Tell us a bit about some of the projects that you're really proud of.
Yeah, so one of the very first things we ever did, which was fun and it was long, but there was Walgreens and Boots and the whole pharmacy sector here, which has evolved absolutely incredibly. Some of the other companies that have been particularly beneficial in diabetes, and here sadly the numbers are absolutely astronomical and particularly kind of scary in the under 30 population. So we spend a lot of time on that. We've also done a lot in the whole digital education space, where our partners have been incredibly well known and great investors for. So it's now I'm really focused on supporting the Western technologies that can come here, that got the DNA, that want a partner. Granted, they want capital. Everybody wants capital, but they have the DNA, to come here. A company we just had around the region last week, which is just an amazing, company in Boston on the gene sequencing side. They're going after, not on purpose, but a lot of the genetic disease states that are prevalent in the Arab world. And to see, every meeting we go to, one of the locals that's in the meeting go, "Oh, my cousin, my brother, my father," and then here's a company that inshallah can actually, help, a healthcare population. That's where it gets the most fun, particularly at my age.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And in terms of artificial intelligence, so now this is the new buzzword. Everything has to have an AI element into it. Where do you see that going within this particular sector?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of people way more expert than I. And by the way, one of our partners is very involved in the whole AI AI scene. There's no question that that it is the way of the future. I wish that I had listened to a friend of mine, and particularly my wife's, who's an engineer, who we went on a long walk, and he was in AI and started talking about the macro. And I kind of scratched my head and I went, okay, that sounds great, but maybe for my kids' side. But if I had done everything that he had talked about, I would have bought an AI ETF 2 years ago, and the rest would be history. The thing that one worries about is that everybody's talking about it, and just like this friend said, the issue is going to be, who really is trained in that. I think everybody has all of a sudden become an AI expert, and I think I like, in most things, a little shui. Let's just go, let's go a little slower. There's a lot of capital being thrown at it right now, which again, I think is great. And particularly in healthcare, it's going to be phenomenal in education. As one of our friends and partners, summit next month is going to highlight, is that really is, the future. But I think on the investment side, one's got to be just really careful, just because, it seems like a bit of a fad at the moment. It almost reminds me of kind of the SPAC craze that we had about 2 years ago. There was a huge spike in it. Obviously AI is way different because it's here, forever. And we're, huge fans of it. But also, looking to slowly.
Yeah, shway. What does the future look for you, Eric? Where do you see yourself focusing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Personally?
Yeah, personally.
The nicest answer is that, it's absolutely, amazing to be here. And again, I don't want to make it sound like this is a commercial, for Abu Dhabi. And for those that are listening that haven't been here, I hope you all, hear, my enthusiasm, and also, there's a reason I don't have much hair, and if you looked at my back, there'd be a lot of tire marks and scars. But as far as a place, I can hardly think of, a place that's easier to do business and be as a family. I also do love the mountains. And so there are not too many of those around here. So I enjoy that. And yet, I think, when this whole started, what was going on in the region, I didn't know if it was going to be just another cycle. I've been through 3 of those, since '84. And this one, really feels like it's really sustainable, and it's a lot of different.
What do you mean by cycles?
Cycle. Well, when you had oil prices high, and the world in a bit of a recession. Obviously recession is a relative term, but certainly like right now in my world. The private markets have basically dried up. Public markets have been dry for quite a while, and yet the Middle East is got their sign out saying, "Hey, we're here, ready to do business." I think that's going to continue, for a long time, and I think, and believe in, inshallah, that the companies that come here, whether they're funds or whether they're companies looking for capital or joint venture, or hopefully all of the above, will end up staying here because they really want to, because it is an amazing place in that regard.
It is, and I keep hearing that more and more from foreigners that want to come and test the waters here. They fall in love with the place. I mean, I'm biased. I've been here almost as you have been here. So, it's just a lovely place to be in. If life is a book, on which chapter are we now in the Eric Wilson story?
In my story, my gosh, I would hope, or I'll call it in baseball terms, I hope I'm just going into the seventh inning. So
Seventh inning. Okay.
yeah. And, but happily, I don't look for the game to end anytime soon.
Eric, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. It's been a real pleasure. Every time I sit down with you, I learn something new. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I hope I was helpful and just, absolutely, my pleasure to do anything for you and Multiply.
Have a lovely day. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. See you in the next episode.